Our focus remains on South Africa, where the National Union of Metalworkers of South Africa, NUMSA, says comments attributed to the National Association of Automobile Manufacturers of South Africa, NAMSA CEO Mikel Mabasa, are detached from what it describes as a national crisis in the automotive industry. NUMSA's response follows a statement by NAMSA in which the association reportedly described Chinese vehicle imports as fantastic and a wake-up call that South Africa and its vehicle assemblers should simply accept. The union argues that such remarks, made as the country continues to grapple with widespread job losses, are not only irritating but provocative. NUMSA says it will not accept a narrative that normalises job losses and factory closures under the guise of increased competition and consumer choice. For more information, we joined on the line by NUMSA's national spokesperson, Phakamile Hlubi-Majola. A very good afternoon to you, Phakamile. Good to have you with us. Welcome to Africa in Business.
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to your listeners. Thank you for having me on the show.
So what a way to start the new year, right? You've come out as NUMSA quite critical of NAMSA's comments on the rise of imported vehicles in the country. Why have you taken exception to these comments by the association that Chinese vehicle imports are, I quote, fantastic and a wake-up call for South Africa and its vehicle assemblers?
Yes, as the National Union of Metal Workers, we have taken note of the commentary made by Mikel Mabasa, who's the CEO of NAMSA, and basically where he says that we should be looking at, or we shouldn't just look at it from the side of auto manufacturers being threatened, that we should celebrate the flooding of cheap Chinese vehicles onto the market because of the benefit to consumers. Our view as a union is that, first of all, we're not against consumers being able to access cheaper vehicles. We think that is important. We think it's important for the domestic market to be affordable, for vehicles rather to be affordable to the domestic market. Our problem is that what you have here are comments from the CEO of, one of a representative of the industry, who in our view is not presenting a full picture of the situation. Cheaper Chinese cars may benefit consumers in the short term, but if you're looking at this from that very narrow perspective, you will miss a fundamental issue, which is that they do not necessarily automatically benefit South Africa's economy, the industry as a whole, or the industrial base. And those for us are two very different issues. And we feel that he has simplified the whole debate, made it purely about the consumer. He's not actually looked at other fundamental issues that over in the long term are going to have an impact on the very same consumer that right now is benefiting from cheaper cars. And we view that as a short-term benefit.
So from your assessment, are you saying that there's a risk that NAMSA's stance prioritizes market growth over job protection? Is that your fundamental argument here?
Well, if you want market growth, you can't just be looking at the cheapness of the cars, because the reality is that whilst yes, NAMSA is experiencing, or there might be a surge in people purchasing cars, that population of people purchasing cars is shrinking daily as companies close, as factories close, as deindustrialization increases in South Africa. We have to look at what are the Chinese doing in South Africa. Is their role to increase local manufacturing? Is their role to increase domestic job creation? Is their role to increase industrialization locally? Do they, for example, procure locally from local producers? Are they making sure, for example, that whatever they're doing benefits the local component manufacturing industry in South Africa? Unfortunately, the answer is no. So this is why we're saying that the analysis that the representative from NAMSA is giving is very superficial, and it's not looking at all of the issues which ultimately contribute meaningfully to the growth of the industry and the growth of the sector in South Africa as a whole. Because the reality is this: we might have cheap cars from China today, but if you don't address the things that I've just mentioned, that base of people who are working and are able with disposable income to buy cars is shrinking. If Ford, for example, goes ahead with with the retrenchments that it has already called for, and other companies go ahead with the retrenchments that they're planning or that they might be planning as a result of the onslaught of cheap Chinese vehicles, and those workers are not absorbed in new industries, perhaps replaced by China, okay, whether there's some level of assemblies in South Africa, then we're not benefiting, because it just means that we're actually adding to unemployment, and you're going to have an even smaller base of people who are going to be able to afford these cheap Chinese cars that the NUMSA executive is currently celebrating.
Let's look at this, Phakamile. In essence, consumers are getting the best end of the deal. They are now able to purchase cars at a much more affordable rate. But what efforts are being made as far as trying to reduce the prices of cars that are perhaps manufactured in South Africa? What measures have been put in place to address those long-standing structural issues that we've been discussing for a while now? High production costs, the instability of electricity supply, logistics bottlenecks, for example. Are those other approaches and discussions that are being had right now?
So on those issues, those are also fundamental issues that must be addressed, and I'm not saying they're not important. They definitely are important, and they're part of the conversation. By the way, he doesn't mention those things. He only mostly talks about how this is cheaper for the consumer, without addressing some of those industry issues that you've just raised, such as the bottlenecks in manufacturing, such as regularity of energy. All of those things, we need those things if we're going to boost manufacturing and industrialization. There's no argument there. But unfortunately, he doesn't talk about that. And that's why we're saying that the argument that is superficial. It's superficial even from that perspective. But also what he doesn't talk about, for example, is that since 2018, we've had imports from China and India. These have grown to about 20%, 26% of the market. At the same time, we've seen plant closures in the component sector. We've seen thousands of skilled jobs lost. We've seen local suppliers being pushed out. And what we've also seen when it comes to Chinese companies is that many Chinese firms, when they come to South Africa, they don't use local labor. They bring their own skilled labor. They also import most components, and the local procurement and skills transfer is minimal. So what we're saying is that you cannot have an argument or promote the flooding of cheap Chinese cars onto the market without addressing these fundamental issues that I've just mentioned, which are actually directly tied to local production, job creation, and increased domestic manufacturing.
Let's bring in then Phakamile, the Department of Trade, Industry and Corporation. And what are the specific policy interventions that you as NUMSA are calling for in order to protect the local automotive industry and those jobs?
So we have actually been very clear that the Department of Trade and Industry needs to do more to protect the local market. We've said this. They're aware of this. We've submitted documents and papers and plans. We've been very active on this front. And we are not excusing the DTIC and its role in relation to this. We are simply saying that it is a mistake to simplify this debate and make it purely about cheap cars. This discussion can never just be limited to cheap cars. These cheap cars must also contribute to job creation. They must also contribute to local production. They must also contribute to the protection of the domestic components sector in South Africa.
We'll have to, unfortunately, Phakamile, leave it at that today. But I think point well articulated there, a very holistic or a more holistic approach to this entire situation is to be desired. We thank you for your time, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was NUMSA's national spokesperson, Phakamile Hlubi-Majola. Mikel Mabasa, we did reach out to him, the CEO of the National Association of the Automobile Manufacturers Association. We reached out for him for comment, but we were unable to reach him, therefore a right of response. If at any point, he does respond and he does want to take this further, we certainly are here for that.